Welcome to the show today. Today I have Gabriele Ottino on the show, and he's the former CEO of Doodle, not Google, but Doodle. And I think most people around the world now know what Doodle is, who are in the business world in meeting scheduling and trying to find the right times with teams and stakeholders and everything. So I'm very excited to talk about this experience with you, Gabriele, and really talk about this case as well that you've led. But let's first, start with you as a person. Let's first start a little bit with your own story. What's the background story that got you from, where you, from the early days to where you are today?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, when I started out, so I started with actually studying physics, right? So I was like in very theoretical things, a lot of maths and so on. And when I loved my studies, and when I came out of that, I was like, all right, but business is very interesting as well. It's you have teams working together to solve a business problem, to grow a company, and so that's what really interested me. So one of the anecdotes that I have there is that when I was in my exchange year in Sweden, there was in the physics department, there was the Financial Times was laid out for free, right? And so it was exactly in the time of the first internet boom and bust. And so I read all of these stories of interesting people building up companies, having a real impact in people's life. And I was like, this is really interesting. I'd love to do something like that. So I went into business to Accenture as a consultant, did a lot of IT project management. And then I really thought, all right, now it's time to learn the business ropes, and went and did an MBA in London. And that's where I really discovered my passion for startups, for digital startups. I worked for different startups in the very early stages as a student, and then coming back to Switzerland, joined a startup, and from there then went to Tamedia, where first I did very general project strategy work across all of the parts of the Tamedia business, from print all the way to digital, and then joined the digital department when Christoph Brand joined Tamedia to lead that part of the business. And that's where I worked with all of these portfolio companies that people in Switzerland will know, Homegate, Jobs, Doodle, obviously as well, Ricardo when we were in the acquisition and after the acquisition, and many of those other companies as well. Until the time came to say, hey, now it's really time to do something operational and really also take responsibility and lead a business. And the opportunity came up to go and take over Doodle as the CEO. And there, yeah, we really changed a lot, coming from a very much ads business model over to the subscription model where Doodle started to invest when I joined, and it keeps investing there as well now.
Thanks for shining a light a bit on the trajectory in terms of the background. It's really interesting, the path, and moving like from sort of like moving through the different functions, moving through the different parts of the business, from consulting to strategy to operations. Really interesting. Now, before we go into the Doodle case a bit more, I want to talk about purpose, why, vision. I'm always very curious about that. What is that? What is it that gets people out of bed in the morning? So I'm super curious about that. What is it that like motivates you? What is it that drives you to get out there, make change, to take on big challenges? Is there a red thread in your life or in your career so far?
I think what I really like is to have a direct impact with my work on the future, of a business, of a company, and really bring about, sometimes pretty fundamental change. and so that's what I really liked as well in the strategy function before. So we were really thinking deeply about, what is the strategy of this company? How can we differentiate towards our competitors? And that's also what we did at Doodle. How can we build a product that is more than the Doodle most people know today, that really helps you to schedule any kind of meeting you may have in your work environment mostly. And so that's a pretty fundamental change that we've been bringing about. And that's what really brings me out of bed. It's really about bringing a business onto a new trajectory. And specifically for Doodle, but also generally more, I'm really interested in software, and also productivity software in specifically. I remember when I was a kid, and I got my first computer sort of in secondary school at that time. A lot of my peers would do games and so on. Obviously, I did do gaming as well, but I was really interested on how these programs work. How can I make Excel do what I want to do? It sounds really nerdy, but I was really much more interested in this kind of, all right, I can do this and that, I can build this and that, and so that's kind of a passion that's been with me for a long time. Figuring out software, trying to bring something to understand how that's valuable to people.
Very interesting. That's for sharing. It's an interesting combination. On the one side, sort of like a passion for a specific thing, and on the other hand, sort of like a drive for the impact, for the direct impact in something very tangible, something very practical. Let's talk a bit more about lessons learned on your journey, specifically maybe on the Doodle case. I'm very interested. Maybe you can share some background in terms of the period that you were there from.
Mm-hmm.
When did you join, and when did you left, and what was there, and what was sort of like the change that you went through with the company? And then along the way, we can pick maybe some interesting, milestones or points in terms of challenges or lessons learned.
Yeah, sure. So when I joined Doodle, that was in July 2016. So almost 4 years ago now, and so at that point, Doodle has grown virally by itself. Usage is still grows, and people have more and more meetings, and Doodle obviously is the perfect way to schedule that. At that point, though, it became apparent that to have a real growth strategy, to really become the category defining product for scheduling, there was a new strategy needed. So before that, Doodle was very much the tool for everybody, for the business trying to schedule a meeting with its board members, all the way to the barbecue, or to the to the private things. And it was pretty much all over the place, this usage. And together with that, the business model was almost exclusively advertising on the platform. And also, it was quite a small team still at that point, right? So it was like almost, not entirely 20 people, most of them in Zurich, with a small office in Berlin for the mobile apps. And it was run very well. So for a small company like that, it was nicely profitable and so on. And we said, all right, but there is much more potential there, right? There needs to be a growth strategy that can bring us to a different stage. Almost like, what is the plan to become the Dropbox of scheduling, right? So that's kind of the ambition that the owner as well, Tamedia, had, and that we sort of said, okay, what is it that we need to do to get there? And it became apparent very quickly that with the Doodle Premium that has existed for a number of years, there was a great starting point, and that at that point, though, the Doodle Premium didn't have enough features and enough to really drive that change. And so in this strategy exercise, really what we defined is that we should be banking on the subscription model, and that we should invest in the product, make the product better, and bring the premium product to a place where it's much more interesting. And with that came as well a certain focus and saying, hey, look, yes, we won't tell private people to stop using Doodle, and we will not take away features from Doodle, but we need to focus on the business user, who is also going to be the one that actually will and can pay for that product. And so that was kind of the starting point. And then we obviously went to our shareholder, asked for investment, turned smaller scale but nicely profitable product company into an investment case. And in these 3.5 years, we really went from this about not even 20 people to over 70 across the world. A lot, about 20 to 25 in Zurich, about as much in Berlin. We have a development office in Belgrade, and marketing and sales in the US, and some people also in Israel from a startup acquisition we had made earlier. So quite a different animal from when I joined until when I left, and quite a big transformation in that way.
That's a very interesting case. Also, like in the beginning, where I'm very happy that you talked a lot in detail in terms of what it was and how it was structured and how it turned, so to say, from a nicely profitable small company into an actual investment case to actually grow into something much bigger. And then like what happened in those 3.5 years. So now I really want to talk a little bit more about the specific pieces along the journey. Maybe there's one or two important lessons that you can paint out that you learned along the way, and what was the context around it in that situation?
Yeah, there's a couple of general lessons, I think, for me personally as well, right? One is that you can never communicate enough during a change like that, and probably I haven't communicated enough to really make sure that everybody understands where we're going and that everybody comes along, and you have to stay consistent and on message. So with this entire change from going from an advertising based business mostly to more of a subscription based business, that obviously doesn't change from one day to another. The advertising business is still a huge part of the revenue, and so we had to really make sure that keeps on going, that keeps on generating the revenue, which paid the salary of most of the people in the business, right? But given that the goal was really to go for subscription, most of the communication, most of, for example, our all hands meetings were about the subscription business. Also, most of the new hires and the investment in the product. And that is a pretty difficult situation where you're like, the money is still coming from one part of the business, but this needs to keep going on. And but you need to invest in what you are actually going for as a strategy. And so communication, a lot, very consistent, is very, very important. At the same time, and that's the other lesson, is change happens, right? So we started with investing mostly in sort of self-service subscription, where small businesses, 1 or 2 people or 5 people, can just enter a credit card and buy a subscription. And we saw that a lot of these people, they were part of a bigger company. And they said, right, we should maybe do some B2B sales, right? And so that is a pretty fundamental change. And we also saw, hey, in the B2B case, that brings even, you know, higher scalability, larger, how do you say, less churn in the business, so people keep longer the subscription, and you can grow within a big company. You start with a small team and you grow within the company. And so that was a pretty fundamental change. So you go from trying to communicate often, consistent, and being on strategy, to having a pretty fundamental, you know, evolution of the strategy. And I also learned then that I, as a person, am much more comfortable with change, and also, you know, sometimes even pretty fundamental change, than obviously the team at large, right? And so you then have to watch out that you don't change the messaging too often, but only when it's really, really relevant. So these are kind of my two things. You can never communicate enough, but change will happen, and you have, you know, to take your team along with that. And looking back, you know, probably I failed one or the other time to really keep the team in this entire journey, because it's hard. You need to, you know, you need to be very present, very very out there, and on message.
I love that combination. Just to recap, I think it's so important. I want to talk about that a little bit more the way I understood it. So I love the two parts in terms of over communication, always, basically, and even more than too much. That's one thing. And with a consistent message. And it's sort of like there's this one side of the coin, and then the other side of the same coin is change always happens. And these consistency and change seem kind of like complete opposites, but in today's business world, they're always part of the same plan and part of the same coin. And I think that's where the real challenge and the interesting lessons come in, when they're both on the plate at the very same time, on the very same plate. Because you're trying to keep a message consistent, very example of membership, small business, this and that. And then suddenly the case of B2B, oh, it's large. That's the user drives that, the customer actually drives that. So it's not like we thought about it, so we're going to, you know, go in that direction. No, it's actually the market is driving here. So now the over communication is even more important, because like the micro communications along the way make sure that there's not suddenly, it doesn't feel like there's suddenly a big shift in communication, but the micro communication ensures that, like, if it's, you know, if we're communicating 100 times a day and not twice a day, then, you know, it doesn't feel like, oh, suddenly there's a complete shift. It feels much more like, oh, there's a tendency towards a different direction, which actually makes sense because we understand, oh, it's driven by the customer. I love that combination. So I really, really thank you for pointing these specific things out. Now, I want to talk about the growth of this, because maybe for a Silicon Valley company, this is not much, you know, but for a Swiss company, I mean, that's a lot of growth. You know, that's 50 people in 3 years. That's a lot of growth. So my basic question is, first of all, in today's talent world, where do you find 50 people in 3 years?
That's a very good question. So, I mean, one is obviously we've been in recruiting mode like constantly. You never stop recruiting. And then, you know, even for a great company like Doodle, obviously there's people who decide to go and join another company. So you have, on top of that, you have some churn, obviously, as well. Now, how to do that? I mean, Doodle is in the very comfortable situation, especially in Switzerland, to be really, really well known, but also internationally. People have used Doodle all over the world, in every country of the world, literally. And so it's really well known, and it's a great brand. So that has always helped us, specifically also in Switzerland. But the other way we made sure that we can hire all of these people is that we said, hey, look, we already have this this presence in Berlin, and Berlin is a very active hub of startups, of young companies, and how can we leverage that? So we decided to move into a bigger office, to really invest in Berlin and hire a lot of people there, and we've been pretty good at that. And then so that's one. So in Switzerland, great brand name. In Germany as well, plus a great ecosystem in Berlin, where we've been lucky enough to find really, really good people. And then in the partnership with Tamedia, obviously the 100% shareholder, we had the possibility, the access to a development center in Belgrade with a partner that is partnering with Tamedia. And so we built up a technology team there of very, very talented people that, very deep tech knowledge and very well managed partnership. So that's where I think it's partly also this kind of distributed setup, which comes with a whole other number of challenges, but that has really helped us to try and find the best people where we can find them. And so I think that's that. And it's really, and it's also the story, right? It's really the story. Hey, look, you are joining this company with a potent and willing investor that is Tamedia, that really wants to develop this into a globally leading company. And you're going to join at the beginning, right? It's you're just building this now, and this is the vision, and we are going to rid the world of the pains of meeting scheduling, and we're going to even maybe make meetings themselves more efficient and more useful. And that's something that everybody can relate to. Everybody has had this never-ending back and forth of, hey, can you do this day, can you do that time? And so that's something that everybody can relate to, and they can say, yes, if we can bring the right people together in the right meeting, they can change the world, right? Today's world is so much more about collaboration than ever before. Fast collaboration, solving problems together, that you need to meet. And I see Doodle as obviously a great driver of that. And I think that kind of mission and vision really resonates with people and makes it purposeful as well to work in a company like Doodle.
It's really interesting what you mentioned in terms of what to leverage for bringing people on board. I mean, the brand is one thing. If you have a great brand, that's awesome. You can leverage that. And then the story, the story basically, or the mission or vision, whatever you're going to call it at the end of the day. But the story that is so important. And for that, you don't even necessarily need to be a very famous brand or something like that. You can have a strong story without anybody knowing you, because it's not about the brand then necessarily. It's about the actual story and who's telling it. So I love that very much. Now, more practically, how did you recruit? Like, did you just, everybody in the company tapped into their networks and just like went out there? Did you have an internal staffing team that was awesome? Did you tap into Tamedia resources? Did you hire a recruitment partner to help with that? How did you practically actually go about bringing that many people on board?
I mean, essentially all of the above, right? So yes. So we've had Tamedia actually has that across their business. Also like a referral bonus, right? We've had people join because other people have brought them in, and they've been, some of the best hires, really. And then we've tapped into Tamedia. They have a very professional HR and staffing team that we could tap into. In Berlin, we first worked with an agency, which was with a small agency, which worked so, but then later hired our own person to run HR recruiting, and she's done a phenomenal job as well in bringing in really the right people. And then we incorporate everybody in the business. So interviews are obviously held by, for engineers by engineers, for product managers by product managers. We bring in the team, we meet the teams. We made, kind of these homework assignments to really find out which are the right people. And and a lot of the time also of people in the team went towards recruiting. And sometimes there were conflicts with, hey, look, we need to deliver this or that feature, or I need to work on this or that. And, my team is recruiting. And then as a leader and as a leadership team, you have to make sure that the people understand, yes, this will maybe affect your productivity now, but if we can't hire those people, where will we be in a couple of months, right? And so there's a lot of that going on. So there was in numerous interviews, first stage interviews, then next one, homework assignment, meet the team interviews. It's a very involved process, but also a very important one, because you obviously want to hire the best people and those that really match your culture and business.
Very interesting. I mean, what I'm super curious about as well is when so many new people join the organization. I mean, you end up after 3 years with 2/3 new people in that sense, basically, right? Which is very different from most organizations. How do you deal with that along the way? So people feel integrated, they feel part of the team when essentially everybody's new in that sense. Like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so we had to. I mean, for some parts of the things, we really also had to build processes, right? So what is the onboarding process, right? What people should new hires talk to on their first days? What is going to be their first tasks? How do they, we always had a buddy or mentor for everybody. So that's kind of the person who already knows how everything is working, and people had a direct person there. So there's a lot about process as well. I think a lot of the feedback from new hires was, hey, how open and helpful the team is. So, there's never sort of the reaction, yeah, don't bother me, I need to work, and so on. Everybody has been always super helpful. It's something that new hires have told us how great it is, how helpful everybody is. And then I think the thing that we were starting to tackle more specifically and more knowingly before I left is the culture question. So maybe, I went through development there as well a little bit. My view before was, yes, culture is the people you hire. So you need to, see that you hire the people that match the culture that you want to have. But I don't think that's enough in the meantime. So I've learned there as well that you really need to consciously build a culture and values that you think are important for an entire company to reach the goals that you want to have, and also to give feedback to people, or to challenge behavior that is maybe not acceptable, or that that could be better. And if that is really sort of values and a culture that everybody knows, then you can say, hey, look, what you did there and that's great, but it doesn't align exactly with this value that we're trying to drive.
I love that part with the culture as well. I find that really interesting. I find the culture discussion always interesting because there's no handbook.
There isn't. And as I say, me personally as well, I developed from a more of a, it's just the people you hire to know we actually need to consciously do something to shape culture. And so that was kind of the end of my tenure. That were like the first bits going in that direction.
Now, another question that I have is around the international teams. So when you started there, it was pretty much local, and then when you left, it was pretty much international and different local different locations. So how do you with a very like a distributed organization, how do you still ensure that if not everybody's on the same building on the same floor, how do you make sure that people still work together effectively, that there's an actual exchange, that because people are remote, it doesn't happen around the water cooler or the coffee machine? How do you ensure that there's an actual exchange and people really connect, not just based on structured meetings, but all the micro pieces that are also very important?
I think it's a combination of how you organize the teams, and then what kind of tools you're using, and kind of the processes, the structured meetings that you said. So in terms of how we organize the teams, we started a couple of years ago to introduce cross-functional teams. Really try to have for every feature or part of the product to have sort of self-contained teams that have all the people they need to work on that. So there's a product manager, there's a designer, there's a number of engineers, and they work as a cell, as a unit to really drive that piece. And from the beginning, those teams were usually multi-location. We switched, and so that's where most of the work happens. And so there, it's really the teams who need to develop their own way of working that ensures exactly that. That ensures very communication very often, and so on and so forth. So that's one part, the kind of the organizational part. Then the tools part is really, video conferencing needs to be ubiquitous. You need to understand that you need to write things down. So decisions or discussions, even if they happen just between two people sitting right next to each other, need to be written down, because otherwise the other people in the team will not be able to do that, to see that. So most of the communication happens through Slack, even if people are just sitting across the table. Then we introduced Notion as a wiki, notepad, whatever you want to do with it. And that sort of exploded by itself. We started testing it and everybody adopted it. It's so easy to use. And so that's where, documentation, processes, status meetings, all these kind of things were just written down. And then lastly, it's the structured meetings. So, all of the stand-ups in the teams, the retrospectives in the teams, but then also the all hands meeting, which we switched from a monthly cadence to a weekly cadence, but a little bit shorter. So every week we had everybody tune in on the video conference, and who's joined, how is the business doing, what are new product features, what's been great or not so great in the last week, and so on. So these kind of a structured meeting where really everybody comes together and sees the latest state of the business. And that's, but it's hard, right? I mean, the number of hours, if you sum it all up, that I and the teams have lost setting up video conferences. I mean, Zoom is great, but even Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever you're using, it's still not not that user friendly as it could or should be. And so it's really hard. And reminding everybody to write things down, to not just discuss stuff near the coffee machine, but to make sure that everybody can chime in, or even to start with a written down piece and then discuss around that. That's really hard work. And it's maybe it's even easier if you're fully distributed, and now in the situation we're in today, that's true for everybody, I guess. Maybe it's even easier when you're fully distributed than when you have parts of the people sitting in one office and parts in another office, where you still have the feeling, hey, most of the people I interact with are in my office anyway. So I think that's it's challenging as well in this hybrid setup.
Very interesting point with that complete remote setting versus some people are in the office, some not. It's an interesting one. Time will tell.
Yes.
So there's one more question that's a little bit more out there that I want to ask you, which is, let's say you're in your rocking chair and you're 80 years old now, you're looking back at your life and you sort of like see what's been happening over the past so many years now when you're 80 years old, in the business world or in the world in general. What is a change that you really would want to see when you look back at that time? Any change in the world, in the business world?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that I would like the world come back to, if you wish, is to get back to evidence and data-based decisions. When I look out there, I have the impression that people have forgotten that science works, right? I mean, we are talking through a video conference. These are electrons moving between your computer to my computer. There's been innumerous computer engineers working on that over the last 50 years, and it works, right? Because we know how it works, because there is physics behind it. There is chemistry behind, our screens or the production process of a computer, and it all works. And then you feel like a lot of the decisions that are taken in politics, in the world, in society, they stop being evidence and science based. And that's true for climate change. That's true for the virus that we are fighting right now. And people should just come back and say, hey, the fact that I can drive a car is science, right? It's 100-year-old science, but it works. And so that's what I'd really like to see, people getting back to real facts that are, peer reviewed, that everybody agrees this works, these are the facts. And then from there, you can have different opinions and you can fight. What is the right decision based on those facts? What is, but But at least, you have a grounding that you all agree on. These are the facts, and then what to do about them, that will always need discussion. So that's what I like to see for our future.
I love that. I love that very much. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense with your education and where you come from. So it's a very nice closed loop. I like that. So thank you so much for being here, Gabriele. I really appreciate it. We're going to link below this video to your LinkedIn profile so people can connect,
Cool.
and also short bio of yours so people know a little bit more about you. So yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
It was great. It was great to chat with you, Daniel. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, stay safe, wash your hands, and stay at home.